Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 2024 release In a Violent Nature. It's a Shudder original and it's coming to Shudder on Friday, September 13th. A Friday the 13th, which is very fitting for a film like this. So now people will finally, if you didn't see it in the theater, will finally be able to see what all the hubbub was about for this film. People who hated it, people who loved it, and me, kind of in between, because I understand the importance of this film and what it's going for, the idea behind it, but it's also not super entertaining for people like me. But obviously I'll get more into that. So there's things I really liked about this, things I really didn't like about this, but that's why I'm going to tell you about it right now in a no spoiler capacity. So this film is written and directed by Chris Nash. This is the individual's first feature film, which, if this is their start, I am interested to see where things go for Chris Nash. From a directorial standpoint, a cinematography standpoint, things were looking good. There's a lot of nice technical things done with this film, and the idea is quite interesting. So what Chris Nash does next, I'm interested. This is a Canadian film, and again, it's a Shudder original coming Friday, September 13th. Synopsis. It is literally a movie that follows a Jason Voorhees-esque character, which is why it's fitting that this is coming out on a Friday the 13th on Shudder. And it's about basically that perspective. It's about seeing a movie like Friday the 13th from a totally different angle. That's the whole idea behind the film, and that's what is at play here. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of stuff that happens with that. It's got its own killer, it's got its own lore, it's got all that stuff going on, and it is interesting to see how they decide to play with that very interesting new perspective. So, yeah. So that's the movie. That's all I'm going to give you for synopsis. Check it out. The opening sequence is interesting because you hear characters talking, but the camera stays focused on a nature scene the entire time. This is indicative of what they're trying to get through to you with the film, of just, this is our focus. This is something very different. Typically with a movie like this, they're going to start with, oh, here are the characters. Let's get to know them. You don't get to know these characters really, because it's not from their perspective. So they're showing you early on, hey, this is what we're focused at. This is what we're focused on. And there is another importance to it as well, because they also finish the film with some shots of nature as well. So I'll leave that up to other people, because there is kind of there's a parallel that they draw in this film between some things, and I'll leave that up to everyone to watch and talk about. But you can talk about it in the comments, and if you want to know, we can talk spoilers in the comments. So if you want to ask me about it, you can feel free to do that. And also, while I'm talking about it, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, hit the notification bell button, all that stuff if you want to support me. Anyway, on to it. It does strike an interesting dichotomy between the peace and serenity of nature and the horrible brutality of the killer in this film, which I believe is named Johnny. Very, very generic. There's a lot of very generic stuff in this film, which kind of is one of my issues with the film, is they could have done a little bit more. They could have developed the story a lot more, that story aspect. It seems like it's a lot more style over substance, unfortunately, and the story is just not that interesting in my opinion. It really isn't. It feels very generic, and like, I know that that's kind of what they were going for, because they want it to feel very familiar. They want it to feel like a Friday the 13th type thing, but at the same time, you can do that, but also make it more interesting, like have more depth of story, depth of characters, all that type of stuff, because it's not a situation where the camera is like always like following right behind the killer, or it's killer POV. It's never, well, actually not never, it switches. It's like sometimes it's following the killer, sometimes it's killer POV. But then there are times where the killer's not there, where the camera is filming. So it does become a little bit confusing cinematography wise because of that, because they don't choose one perspective. So for that reason, it feels like it kind of breaks its own rules in a way. But, it is its own thing. But I do love that dichotomy of, like, we're in nature, things are very nice and peaceful, but then there's this horrible killer and these brutal kills, which, by the way, there are some really great kills in this film, including one film that I anticipate will be nominated for a Fangoria Chainsaw Award. I'm pretty sure of it. But some other good kills in this one as well, and that's why it is this interesting thing of the great practical effects and the brutality of this character kind of in nature, in this nice, serene, beautiful nature that you get to experience as well. So the setting of the film is wonderful. It's beautiful, but it stands in contrast to what's going on. The sound design is quite good in this film, which is very important since there is no score, which is a very bold choice. Honestly, I kind of like that they went with no score. I am the type of person who is very pro dropping the score out of certain scenes in the film. I think for a lot of people it's not going to play well. And for me personally, like there were times where I was like, oh man, I really do feel like a score really would have helped things at this moment, because the more intense moments don't feel intense. Like there isn't really any creepiness, there isn't any dread. It never gets scary because there is no score to it. And it does help showcase how important a score can be, and well, how important scores really are to films. So it's the total opposite side of the spectrum from what I always call out with these films, which is, I'm usually calling it out like they're going way too heavy on the score. They're like screaming at the audience. And then this film's just the total opposite, where they're just like, you're not getting anything, no score for you, which I like that more than the screaming at you side of the spectrum. But, balance is what I'm really looking for in films. The movie is very slow due to following the slow-moving killer, but you see and hear what the killer does, so you actually do get some story from it. I was very apprehensive at first. I was like, oh man, this could be really terrible if it's solely from the perspective of this killer, and we just don't hear what's going on with the other characters. We don't get any dialogue, like nothing. But that's not the case. Like, you do get story from, like, hearing people, and I do like that aspect of, like, oh, okay, we're hearing things like the killer would, and it's in the way that he would, because, he's looking at someone from, like, across the field, and it's, distant noise. Like, you're kind of just hearing a little bit of the conversation. So it's realistic in that sense, and I appreciate that attention to detail. The acting is serviceable. I don't think there are no great performances in this film. It's a low budget independent film, you can tell. And I think for that, they did a good job with the film. When it comes to the acting, it's serviceable. It is decent to not so decent. Cinematography is very voyeuristic, if that is something that's interesting to you. You do get a lot of kind of like walking outside of like a building at night, kind of like looking in. It makes me think back to giallo films, like this is where slasher started, is the inspiration from giallo films of that kind of killer POV that they had. And they did that because they don't want to reveal much about the killer in giallo films. And then that was adopted into creating slasher films. So anyway, side tangent. There is one, I already talked about that one kill that's going to get be nominated for a Chainsaw Award. I don't think it's going to win it, because whatever Terrifier 3 does would probably win it, is my guess. I understand the ending, but it could have been done in a more impactful way. This goes back to what I was talking about with the story. There's a lot of great ideas here, and there are some things that are very well executed for what the ideas are, but I also think fleshing it out further would have been great, and they could have done things in a more impactful way to kind of endear the film to people more. Now, that said, I know there are a lot of people out there who love this film, so it's not really going to be for everyone. I'm glad there are people who loved it. That's wonderful. I always hope that films find an audience. I'm not the prime audience, but at the same time, I didn't hate the film either, so that's a plus. This is a movie that works a lot better as a short film, in my opinion. I think it could have been a phenomenal short film. It's one of those things where, as a short film, unbelievable. This would be an unreal, amazing short film. As a feature-length film, it's all right-ish, So, yeah. I would say this movie should be 45 minutes max. It's like an hour and 33 minutes with credits. It should be 45 minutes, max. Because there's so much wasted time. And the problem is, the novelty of the idea here ends up wearing off probably about halfway through. Well, maybe even a little bit after halfway through, but I'd say probably around halfway through for me personally. The novelty really started to wear off of the idea, and I was just like, okay, now we're just getting a lot more of the same. We're not getting a whole lot extra. There isn't much depth to story. There aren't any characters to really be developed. Like, you're not getting anything at that point. Like, once you get the idea behind it, you're not getting anything else. And that's kind of the problem. And that's why I say, like, as a short film, this would be unreal. Like, I could really see this on a short film scale. Probably, if it was that 45 minutes, probably giving it like 4 stars or so. But as is, as a feature-length film, out of 5 stars, I'm giving it 2.5 stars. I feel like that's where I have to go. I thought about going 3 because I didn't hate the film, but there's just so many things that don't work for it, but there are ones that do, so I really just, I feel like I'm smack dab in the middle, and I think that's the most important thing, is to be as objective. Yes. All the time I have the problem with objective versus subjective. Try to be objective about this film. It's very much like Skinamarink, how it was a very interesting, cool idea for me, but as a feature-length film, it just does not work because it's not entertaining, and at some point you're just like, I just want my time back. So, just saying. But anyway, those are my thoughts on In a Violent Nature. Go ahead and put your comments down there. Like I said, click the thumbs up button, subscribe, hit the notification bell button, all those things. I do appreciate that. But regardless, thanks for taking your time to watch this, and until next time, keep it brutal.